Gracious and loving one, you called the Holy Family to hide away in Egypt to escape the killing of the innocents. You called your people to migrate time and again and reminded them to welcome the stranger, for you were strangers in a strange land. Be with us as we seek to be a welcoming presence for immigrants in our country, in our time. Give us good discernment about how to engage in this place. Continue to bless the work of the New Mexico Immigrant Law Center, accompanying those seeking asylum and fleeing persecution. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. It is good to be with you all. I said in the announcements, for those of you who are coming to the last service, just last Sunday, we had a forum in the church with my two predecessors, with the Reverend Brian Taylor, the Reverend Joe Britton. And Joe talked about a time right around 10 years ago now, when St. Michael's was going through some discernment about how our values of welcome and action were going to be lived out in the congregation today. Joe talked specifically about how this congregation had been working for decades for marriage equality, and how big of a celebration it was in 2015 when marriage equality came, both in the church and in the law of the country. But that it also caused a moment of discernment, because something the church had been working for so long had come to pass. And over that time, the church really found a calling to care for immigrants and refugees. First in the Pogo family, who came and lived in what became the Landing for a couple of years, then welcoming buses that came from El Paso up from Annunciation House. And then in the Landing, as we welcomed folks being released from immigration detention right here in New Mexico. And as many of us know, the situation has changed a great deal. We had two very big ministries, both the Landing and our work with Las Familias, that really were focused on newly arriving immigrants and folks being released from detention. And Annunciation House let us know that right now they don't need us to bring donations down to El Paso, and no one is being released from detention here in New Mexico at the moment. And this is a hard thing for a lot of us. And I thought I'd invite somebody who's I think it's fair to say, let's say a member in good standing at St. Michael's, because members in good standing are folks who are with us at least 3 times a year, because the Episcopal Church is what the Episcopal Church is. And the reality of Teague's life is that she gets taken all over the country and just to Toronto to talk about questions of immigration. Teague has just been named the executive director of the New Mexico Immigrant Law Center. She has been a colleague and a comadre in the work here in New Mexico the last several years. It has been wonderful to run into her up at the legislature and watch her shepherding a whole group of activists and folks working to end immigration detention and working for other legislation on behalf of the immigrant community. And New Mexico is kind of a funny place, because sometimes we forget there's a country. I know sometimes the country forgets that we exist, right? But sometimes we forget there's the rest of the country out beyond us. And when I first started at St. Michael's, I actually heard Teague's name, not from anybody here, but from a colleague on the board of Cristosal, a human rights organization I worked with in Central America, an immigration lawyer named Tatiana Obando from Texas, who said, "Oh, you're moving to New Mexico. You need to meet Teague. She's amazing." So I'm really pleased that Teague made time to come and speak with us about what's going on. She's going to give a little bit of presentation, then I'm going to interview her for a little bit. So if you would join me in welcoming Teague.
Thanks so much. It's such a pleasure to be here with you all. I was more involved when I first returned to New Mexico from South Florida. I was living there for 8 years and wanted to come back home after having 2 kids and wanting to be closer to family. So in that first year, I was a lot more involved. But this congregation, its principles, its direction, and its commitment and service to the community does and will always hold a very special place in my heart. And I do consider myself a member in good standing. So I am the co-executive director right now, and then in May will be the sole executive director at the New Mexico Immigrant Law Center. The pronouns I use are she, they, them. I come from a multi-generational, culturally Catholic family in El Paso, Texas, but I needed a little kinder, gentler version of Catholicism, so I converted about 20 years ago. So it was so interesting to hear Reverend Mike talk about the discernment process. And I feel like right now it's very hard to engage in discernment because things seem to be moving so fast. There's a Zen Buddhist monk from Hawaii. Her name is Roshi Norma Wong. And she talks about this concept of collective acceleration. We typically think of time as being on a kind of linear format, just we go from point A to point B a long times line. But times like this make it feel like it's been scrunched together and everything's moving so fast. The right is using this time to consolidate authoritarianism, and they're doing that to great effect. But in that moment of collective acceleration, there's also the opportunity for us to consolidate something. What are we, we're not just blocking, we're not just defending, what are we envisioning and what are we building is on the other side of this, because there is another side of this. We're going to come out on the other side. And when we get there, what have we been doing together? How have we been working together to envision what that looks like? And she says that the way that you do that is that you stand in the slipstream. If you ever stood on a rock in a stream and you look down, you can see the water going around the rock, and there's a place behind the rock that seems almost calm or peaceful. And she advises us to sit there in the slipstream and let the chaos go around you and find what it is that brings you peace, that brings you hope, that brings you vision. And then let's get together and let's figure out how to work together for that collective vision that we're building. So the way that that works for us in immigration right now is that we are seeing the largest attack on a set of constitutional rights for a particular group of people in a way that we've never seen before. Will the 4th, 5th, and 6th Amendment rights to our Constitution continue to apply to immigrants? And if they don't, then who will they apply to? Because when they're done, and if they are successful in their project of mass deportation, then who will they come for next? Certainly we know who's on their top 3. Trans folks will probably be there. But eventually they just get down to anyone who has unpopular political opinions. So right now, the frontline trench warfare in defending democracy is defending immigrants and defending immigrant rights. So the way that we do that at New Mexico Immigrant Law Center, prior to January, I would have told you that we had a multidimensional approach to increasing economic empowerment for immigrant families. And that looked like either filing an affirmative application for some form of immigration relief so that folks could get a work permit, employment authorization, or if they were not subject to any form of relief, then we helped them get an individual tax identification number so that they could form a small business and use the power of the tax code to create small businesses, to hire and fire American citizens if they wanted with that LLC. Now, since January, even that option has been curtailed because the IRS has agreed to turn over the individual tax identification numbers of folks to DHS. That's being litigated. It's in the circuit court right now, and it doesn't look good. We also know that filing affirmative applications in the whole field of asylum law, for example, has changed overnight, and that's a hard thing to grapple with, that's what our country is doing. So right now, what we're doing is pivoting towards what we're calling family protection planning. And that looks like helping parents have the most difficult conversation that they'll probably ever have to have about who is going to take care of their kids. when they're separated, because that is what's coming. I get emotional every time, and I've said it like 100 times in the last 9 months. I have 2 kids, so it's hard to imagine. But we are meeting with families in clinic settings and helping them go through powers of attorney so that they can name those adults. We're also doing asset protection planning. If they have a checking account, a bank account, a home, or a car title, who to say can have access to that, so that if they're detained and if they're deported, someone can help dispose of their assets. Most of these folks don't want their kids to remain in the US without them, but they don't want their kids to go into CYFD or some kind of crazy detention camp for children of mixed status households. And right now that is what can happen. So they just need a safe place for their kids to be, and someone who can help dispose of their assets and then get their kids back to be reunited with them. So we have launched family protection planning clinics. We continue to visit our detention centers. As Reverend Mike was saying, prior to January, there was still the opportunity for folks who were fleeing persecution to declare the need for asylum at the border, and that is basically impossible now. So exterior enforcement is 100% effective, and now interior enforcement, meaning what we're seeing in the news around rounding and detaining and apprehending people in their homes, at their workplaces, and just off the street is what we're seeing. And we're seeing it at a level that we haven't seen for almost over 15, sometimes in some cases 20 years. So the population inside the detention centers has changed dramatically. And what we're seeing in there is changing dramatically. There are 3 Puerto Ricans in Otero County right now, and we're working to get them out. We're seeing folks with statuses in detention. It's almost like the Wild West, in the sense that the laws are not applying to a whole group of people, and they're doing such rapid hiring of folks who are not necessarily predisposed to performing their jobs well. And so there are people inside the detention center who still have their ankle monitors on. There are people inside the detention centers who have been in there for over 60 days and have not spoken to an immigration official. We are working with Las Americas and Estrella del Paso on this very interesting kind of what I'm calling cross-border, and by that I mean cross-state border, but cross-border solidarity around what's happening at Camp East Montana, which is the Fort Bliss Center they've stood up. They're up to 3,000 people there, and they're trying to get to 5,000. It is almost impossible to get inside of that center. Our 3 organizations have been trying for 2 months, and we're just told last week that no matter how many people come from your organization, so we had 3 folks from ours, for example, each organization can only see up to 10 people. And there's 3,000 people in there. And then it takes way longer than it should for one person to even be brought out to us. So for example, on that day we saw 3 people, and we had 3 attorneys there who could have seen, dozens if they had done what they used to do, which is bring people in larger settings so we can make a presentation to a room of almost this size, and then help people in a pro se mass way. But they've cut that off. The hygiene and food has never been good inside of these centers. But it's abysmal at Camp East Montana. It's in the desert. It really is in the desert. There's nothing else around it. It is akin very much to a concentration camp. The conditions inside of there are horrendous. So I'm saying all of this because many of you have visited a detention center, maybe at Cibola or at Torrance County. We continue to visit those detention centers, and there are a couple of other organizations that are doing it now as well. Innovation Law Lab is doing a lot of visitation at Torrance, at least 1 day a week, and then Estrella del Paso is going down to Otero County, that's east of Doña Ana County. We go out every week to Cibola County, yes.
What you talk about rings akin to war crimes.
Yeah, that would be a novel theory to push forward, is to have the UN look at what's happening internally. Is this some kind of internal armed conflict? Is this some kind of, is there a venue at which we could take a claim to some court, maybe the IOC or ICC? We're not a signatory to ICC, but is there some place that we could try and highlight what's happening here? Oh, from our internal courts?
Yeah.
It's not looking good right now. We do still have 3 branches of government. The executive is expanding the concept of a unitary executive and a very powerful form of it. The legislature clearly is not enacting, and the executive, the judicial is barely holding the line, but the Supreme Court is not ruling in our favor. So it doesn't look good from the judicial branch. I think what we need to do as citizens is organize with each other and figure out how to provide witness and counsel to folks who have been kidnapped and are being kept in these camps.
So we will get to question and answer, I promise, Greg. I thought I might spend a little bit of time talking with Teague about kind of where we are and where we find ourselves and that idea of sitting in the slipstream. When we talked, I've said to folks, it gave me a lot of hope because you also talked about kind of energy building. Will you say a word about what you see among immigration activists and advocates?
In New Mexico in particular, I'm very inspired. So, 17 years ago, a group of folks at organizations like Center for Civic Policy and organizing in the Land of Enchantment recognized that the face of the legislature didn't look anything like this POC, people of color majority state. And so they worked to form 501c4s and political action committees and have changed the face of the legislature. And in the last 17 years, we've seen incredible wins for the people of New Mexico, including free childcare, free college, same-day voter registration, the New Mexico Voting Rights Act. We've seen expansion of licenses to undocumented folks, expansion of all kinds of professional licenses. Almost every permit and license can be accessed to folks who have an individual tax identification number. So when I think about what we've accomplished, I think that what we can do together in this state, we are primed to not just be defending one another, but to really be thinking about how we can maximize state protection. If they're going to shout state rights from the rooftop for certain things, what can we do here in New Mexico to make sure that we're passing state laws that defend our immigrant populations? What went into effect in July 1st is called the Non-Disclosure of Personal Sensitive Information Act, and it prevents any state agency from turning information over to ICE. And we are already testing that. Some folks went to go see their parole officers, and when they got into the check-in, ICE had been notified by the parole officer, and so an ethics commission finding has been made against the parole office, and that's in litigation to say that that is a violation of our state law. And we're all following it very closely and providing as much support as we can to Jeremy Ferris and the State Ethics Commission. If you know him, just give him a big pat on the back for what it is he's trying to do around enforcing that law. And so, that's a very good example of why I have a lot of hope about what's possible here. There are not enough attorneys to represent the immigrants that are in detention in New Mexico on a one-for-one basis, so we do need citizens to help figure out how to meet with these folks, track what's happening to them. Our friends at the ACLU of New Mexico, the ACLU of Texas, and ACLU National, we're meeting weekly so that we can identify what it is we're seeing inside the detention centers and at Fort Bliss so that they can bring some form of class action, at least around conditions and access to counsel, because those are things that have been successful in the past. We need to hunker down. We need to figure out how to get through the next 18 months. Hopefully the midterms go well. Hopefully the president, we have another president in 3 years, and then we've made it through a really dark time in our history. But what will we have looked back and said we did? And in New Mexico, I think we'll be able to say that we stood up together and did everything we could for our brothers and sisters in detention.
So the kind of volunteering you're talking about, Innovation Law Labs has an opportunity right now for folks, especially if you're bilingual, but they will take monolingual English speakers, and they're going in once a week to Torrance County to conduct some legal rights clinics, basically, is my understanding of it.
And we do that every week at Cibola County too, which is a little harder to get to for folks. Innovation Law Lab has a lot of Santa Fe folks come down, to Torrance. To Torrance. So it would be great if folks wanted to visit Cibola.
Yeah. So if you're looking for a way to volunteer, the ways right now are not fast and easy, right? It's not like it was at St. Michael's where we could say, just come join, and we've got a group welcoming folks when they arrive, and we need casseroles at this time. The bars are a lot higher. You have to fill out background check forms and give your social security numbers to the detention facilities so that you can be screened to be allowed in. I was supposed to go last Wednesday, but they didn't complete my background check fast enough. And so I'm waiting to go next month with Innovation Law Lab, right? But there are still opportunities. We'll also be exploring adding on to the VITA visits. VITA is an organization that does visiting to immigrants in detention here in New Mexico, also writes letters. But those are the kind of opportunities, as I understand it, that's really what's open at the moment, right?
Right now, for visiting detention centers, that is, and then right now we're also working on standing up what's called a court accompaniment project, because there are not enough attorneys to represent every person who needs to go to an ICE check-in visit. Even if you are in some form of pending an immigration status, you still have to visit the ICE office in Albuquerque periodically, and previously those were very safe visits, but now ICE is showing up and detaining people as they're doing the thing they're required to do when you file for one of these statuses. They're following the what do people always say, do it the right way. Yeah. And so we're getting pretty close to being able to take volunteers. You'd be very well trained. You would always have a staff person with you, either before or after you went, but going with a family or an individual to their check-in, there's nothing you could do to stop the apprehension, but you could document what you were seeing. And if we have enough documentation of unlawful apprehensions, then that would support litigation.
Yeah, it's a tough time, right? Can you say a word, you spoke about the folks who are with status in detention right now, but can you say a word about the changing face of who's being detained too? Because for a while it was kind of Venezuelan asylum seekers, the folks that we were seeing really regularly. But my understanding is that's starting to change a little bit too.
Yes, we're seeing folks who have TPS, temporary protected status. It's a valid legal status still, who have been inside for months. We're having a lot of success with, do people know what a habeas petition is?
Explain it, because some will and some won't. Yeah.
Crime. You want them to say why they're holding you.
Yes, and a federal court process basically demanding that the state provide evidence indicating why they've detained an individual. When the state is forced to turn over the evidence that they have for why they've detained people, it's absurd. And so we've been successful in every one that we've filed. So what we're seeing are people who have no basis for their detention being detained. These are not the criminals that they're talking about on right-wing news channels and podcasts. These are just working people who are many of them in some legal status that is not being acknowledged or recognized by ICE right now.
Say a word, I think it's helpful to, a lot of the folks that we were receiving and the folks that we see in others of our ministries who are here are asylum seekers. Can you say a word about, we often hear about they're only going after the folks who are doing the process illegally, not following the steps. Can you talk about asylum seekers and how they arrived here and kind of who they are and where they are legally?
So it takes a really long time to win your asylum claim. And while you're waiting for the claim to be heard, the system is broken. Like when I talk about envisioning what's on the other side of this, it's not like we want to go back to what we had either. Like there's a great opportunity here to think about what we want to create on the other side. And certainly what we need to fix is a broken immigration system. And part of what makes it broken is just how long it takes to have your case heard. And so the folks who arrive here having fled persecution of some form or another and who were found to have some credible fear for why they are like a basis for that claim, wait years for their asylum claim to actually be heard before an immigration judge. And during that time, they are provided what's called deferred action. They're not supposed to be able to be detained and apprehended, but now the courts and the executive and DHS are saying that if they could find any little ticky-tacky thing, it's not like committing crimes, any reason why somebody should not be allowed to live here. So this is why they're telling people to walk around with like folders with like proof that they've lived somewhere for a certain amount of time, or proof that they've worked somewhere for a certain amount of time, utility bills, like to carry a little folder of important documents that they can demonstrate to the ICE officials who pull them over that they have resided a certain place or worked a certain place for a certain amount of time. If you don't have those documents on you, they're not waiting for you to go get them and come back and bring them to them. They're just taking you. And so you can have a pending asylum claim and be sitting in detention, and many people are right now, and that's in total contravention to the way that we've done things here for decades.
There's in the African American History Museum on the National Mall, the Smithsonian, one of my former prisoners, who's a senior warden, convinced a family friend to donate something that his name's Riley, and Riley says if you ever go, you got to go look for. There's a wallet in the African American History Museum, and it looks like a really thin old tuna fish can, right? Any of you seen this? If you're in DC, you got to go see it. It has a key so that you can roll it up, and what was inside were the freedom papers of somebody who had been born enslaved and had been manumitted, and he carried that wallet with him everywhere because the police forces were prone to arrest people who had been freed and put them back into slavery. And so we're talking about something like that. We're talking about a moment in time where people are again having to carry their freedom papers on them under threat of being detained. And detained, how long are people being detained right now? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Some folks have been in detention for 6 or more months, even folks who have voluntarily deported. So they will bring some forms to you and say, we'll let you out right now if you sign this form and agree never to come back. And some folks have signed those forms and are still in detention. By design, I think, the system is so broken, convoluted, understaffed, and poorly staffed that people can say that they agree to leave and are still sitting in detention here in New Mexico. I think, probably the thing I've heard the most concerning in the last year that's happening here in New Mexico is that children who have been abused, abandoned, or neglected by at least one parent are eligible for a form of immigration relief called Special Immigrant Juvenile Status, or SIJ. And in New Mexico in 2023, we passed a state law that expanded the definition of what abused, abandoned, or neglected means. That definition now includes if you have a parent who's been deported, who has died, or is incarcerated. And we also increased the age eligibility criteria from 18 to 21. So in New Mexico, there are about 2,000 young people who are eligible for that status. And we have a team of 30, about 15 attorneys and support staff that represent those youth. It's a complicated process because, one, the state of New Mexico has to make a finding in state court that the child has been abused, abandoned, or neglected. And then you take that order from the state court judge to immigration court. And then the immigration court looks at that application for special immigrant juvenile status and is supposed to honor the state court order. So when that application is accepted, it's called pending. And up until June, when a child had that application submitted but not heard yet, because again, it takes years to get the actual formal hearing, the child was not subject to detention. In June, the Trump administration revoked deferred action for children in that status. So we have, so far that we know of, 33 of our clients have had Homeland Security investigations visit their home unannounced, Many of these children live with undocumented guardians, and they were asked where they go to school, who their teacher is, and what grade they're in. And since then, 2 of those children have been apprehended and deported. We are in talks with our state attorney general's office and the governor's office to try and think through what we can do to maximize protections for these children. That's just the 33 that we know of. Hundreds of kids are pending in this status. Homeland Security Investigations is ICE's enforcement arm. They're kind of a rogue agency, and they operate like one. And so what we're doing right now is a public information campaign with the Early Childhood Education Care Department and Public Education Department, so that the early childhood centers and the K through 12 schools know not to let HSI onto their property, because they come there saying that they want to do a welfare check. And nothing they do is a welfare check. So we can't let them on to school or child center properties, and then we need to make sure that parents know not to open that door when HSI comes knocking. That's probably the thing I'm most concerned about right now, because those children are the most vulnerable.
So to just, and we'll get to questions and answers, I want to bring it back to where you started, which was what we're seeing right now is an erosion of the protections of the Constitution for immigrants in our midst who are the most vulnerable at this moment because of the priorities of the administration. But that erosion of constitutional protections, when the courts start agreeing with it, you say it has the possibility of snowballing. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about what are you seeing as some of the most important kind of pending questions in terms of legal protections right now?
I think it's the Fourth Amendment. What right do they have to apprehend someone's body or enter their homes? What pretext do they need to do that? What evidence do they need to have in order to issue a warrant? They are still required to have a judicial warrant signed by an actual judge before they enter property. Right now, ICE has a process of administrative warrants, which is just any ICE supervisor can sign a document that says warrant on the top. It's not actually from a judge, but they present that administrative warrant at the door. And if people don't know the difference, and who does, between a judicial and administrative warrant, they do open the door. And that is when they're being apprehended. So I think that we have to demand that the Fourth Amendment apply to these folks, and that administrative warrants are not sufficient. So that is being litigated. The Fifth Amendment right to remain silent, I think, is another right that we're seeing. People do not have to talk to ICE, but they often do say what their name is. We're seeing some pretty cool organizing happening in California. Community members coming together to document, either with video recording and being dispatched to when ICE has come to a neighborhood, and folks going down and shouting to people, "Don't open the door! Don't open the door!" Because you don't have to unless they have a judicial warrant. And ICE can say you can't be here, but actually they don't have a right to say that. And we're winning there. Community members have been found over and over again to be allowed to stand in a public place and yell out constitutional rights.
The bar feels low right now.
Yeah. And the Sixth Amendment right to access to counsel, and that's what we're testing right now, is that we should have the rights that we've always had to enter into detention centers, a prison-like setting, and provide access to attorneys to folks who are detained in there, who may be detained unlawfully. So I feel like if we can all understand that that's where we're holding the line, and make sure that those rights continue to apply to this group of people, then that cascade that I talked about has a harder chance of unfolding. But if those rights fall for this group of people, it's not going to stop.
Yeah. So Simone has been part of conversations in Albuquerque around groups organizing to do the same kind of community gathering around when there's an ICE enforcement action happening. And if you're interested in being part of that, I would encourage you to talk with Simone about that and about how we can do some of that organizing. Around the Fourth Amendment, we've actually done a couple things here at St. Michael's that are really important. Early in the administration, especially when it comes to our food pantry and other spaces on campus where we have folks of mixed status who arrive, I set a policy that said that ICE is not allowed on campus without a judicial warrant. If they have a judicial warrant, we can't stop them, but that they needed to talk with me. This summer, we got worried about our food pantry because of some buzz that we were hearing in the food pantry space. And Simone and the bishop had a conversation while I was on vacation. I got the last phone call you want to get when you're on vacation as a priest, that, you know, the bishop and your associate rector need to talk about your property. The good news about that is that the Episcopal Church at the national level, and we are an international church, but in this case, it's the national level that really matters, has created a policy of responding to the administration that starts with lawsuits, right? And so the Episcopal Church writ large is suing the administration over the change of the definition of refugee, over several different things. But that gave our bishop courage to say, no, Mike, I'm gonna even take that off your plate. No one can come on Episcopal Church property in the Diocese of the Rio Grande in New Mexico or Texas without the bishop's permission to enforce something. And so now our food pantry volunteers have a thing on the back of their clipboards that says essentially like, if you want to come on campus, unless you show me something signed by a judge, here is the bishop's phone number. That sounds funny, but there's a real strategy to that. We want our space to be one of the least comfortable spaces for ICE to try to operate. And we want to be organized about if they do try to come into these spaces, we're like organized ahead of time. The attorneys have already talked. We know what the response is. So it's funny, but it's also just very real and proactive. And that's the kind of work it's going to take by community organizations, but then by citizens for their immigrant neighbors saying, no, this is the line. Like, this is a constitutional protection, and we're going to hold you to that. And if we see something that is in violation of that, we're going to be documenting. I have a lot of clergy colleagues in Chicago right now that are showing up outside detention centers and showing up at ICE actions. And multiple of them have had, it reminds me of the days when I was living in St. Louis and going up to Ferguson. There's been pepper spray directly in the face of clergy. A group of Catholic clergy were denied entry into a detention center to provide Eucharist. And those actions are meaningful because it's praying with our feet, but they're also meaningful because that is a denial of a right. To say that you can't have religious services, that you can't have a chaplain visit, that's another thing that we have to document. So it's a piece there.
And and any business can do that. You can set up a private zone within your business, and it can be sanctuary for immigrants. We have template forms that you can put on your door on the exterior of the business to say, you are welcome here, and ICE is not. And then inside the business, you create an enclosed area that ICE would need a judicial warrant to visit.
Just a quick question. How would we know if it's judicial or if it's ministerial?
Once you look at them side by side, you can tell, and we have some good resources on our website that show what a judicial warrant looks like and what an administrative warrant looks like. It's just that most people don't have the ability to have like side by side comparisons, but there's some really obvious differences, and we can share that information with you.
The biggest is a judge's signature. It should say the name of the judge that signed it is the biggest difference.
The judicial one will just be an ICE employee's name.
An administrative warrant will be an ICE employee's name.
Right.
Yeah.
Can you say something? There have been news reports about how Hispanic Americans, people who've been here possibly multiple generations, you talked about a couple of Puerto Rican folks, and I'm wondering how all of this is kind of more of a big picture political question. Do you have any information or polling or anything on how it's playing in I'm thinking like of the South Texas Rio Grande district.
Yeah.
Went for Trump for the first time ever. And how is it playing in those communities? And I know they're not a monolith, they're just
Sure.
So
divided.
Jim, if I can, I'm going to try to summarize questions so that, because we're recording and we're not passing around a mic. So Jim is asking both about what's happening. Are there folks who are, citizens being detained, multi-generational families, and how is this playing in Latino communities?
Yes, citizens are being detained, and folks in other statuses that make them eligible to reside lawfully in the United States. And then these folks who are not being detained, but the Supreme Court is now saying, because of the virtue of the color of their skin and the language that they may speak in public, that it gives ICE probable cause
Holy crap.
to question their immigration status. That just happened this summer. So what we're hearing anecdotally and polling is showing is that primarily it was Hispanic men who went for Trump in larger numbers than we have ever seen before, and that there is a sense among them when polled. We're trying not to shame folks, because in particular, like I have very intense macho grandparent men and great uncles who don't want to be shamed. So how can we help folks save face? They made the wrong choice. And what they're feeling is, when polled gently, understanding that we don't want to activate that machista part, is that they feel like they've been had. So that's kind of where we're trying to go. Like, yeah, you got played. Not like, you idiot, how could you do that? Like, that's what I want to say to my great uncles, but.
But here's I think it's important to also note that while this administration has initiated an attack on the immigrant community, unlike something we've seen in the living memory of the country, it is not the case that previous Democratic administrations were particularly favorable, right? You had the DACA status that came out under Obama, but Biden's administration stopped releasing people from detention before the new administration came into force. And we've seen a lot of Democratic politicians running a very kind of heavy immigration enforcement agenda. And so part of what you're talking about is a groundswell that could change not just one party's agenda, but the whole agenda of the country. That the comprehensive immigration reform that has been trying to be passed for over 20 years might actually come. Am I reading that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. That the benefit of the unleashing of the kind of rhetoric that we're seeing being used about immigrants, the benefit there is that it allows us to say what we do stand for. It allows us to reject that rhetoric and to say that we want candidates who don't embrace that ideology. And we're seeing some really strong wins around the country. The Democratic Leadership Committee and the DNC are not there yet, but what we're seeing at the grassroots level is very, very impressive. So, speak out and support candidates who are talking about what opportunity is presented right now, because we do need comprehensive immigration reform, and we do need a change in Congress that will bring that about, and that is possible. I have great hope for what is on the other side of the next 3 years. Right now it's trench warfare right now, but it's not going to last forever. And I think we have to be thinking strategically, not just what we're doing right now in the short term to stop what's happening, but long term, who are we putting in office and who are we supporting, and how are we organizing together to protect this community, and then think about the long-term strategic goals as well.
I'm gonna go to Greg and then to Poppy and then to Diane.
I'll try to make this quick. As I understand it, the federal government is ignoring its responsibility for detention centers. Detention centers are supposed to be federal facilities, and they've allowed that outcome to go to private. These prisons are private-run prisons, correct?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. So in New Mexico, can the legislature legislate that we will have no private detention facilities in the state? The second question I have is, what is your opinion of the lower courts, judiciary courts seem to be holding the line for our Constitution. Then it gets to the appeals court, something happens, and we've had something like 138 docket
Yeah.
decisions, which is the Supreme Court really putting off taking care of the issue. So could you just talk a little bit about those?
So I'll just repeat 2 questions essentially. One, what can the state of New Mexico do about the detention facilities run by private prison companies where immigrants are being detained? And 2, what is the state of the judiciary? You know, it seems like at the lower courts, decisions that we're hopeful about get made and then they get overturned all the way up to the Supreme Court. So how would you respond to both of those?
For number one, about 7 years ago, there was a coalition called POP. It was Private Prisons Over People. And they tried for about 3 or 4 years to get the legislature to make state law that would prevent the private prisons in New Mexico. That never gained traction. So the coalition with the legislature, so the coalition restructured and narrowed its focus down to a very nuanced fight, which is to say that the 3 detention centers in New Mexico do operate out of county correctional facilities. And the way that ICE is able to get around the federal oversight that you're talking about is to have the county correctional facilities contract directly with the private prison companies. So it's called an intergovernmental service agreement, and it allows ICE to, like, it subcontracts to CoreCivic, and then CoreCivic contracts with the county correctional facility. The county correctional facility operates like a county correctional facility. They have other populations there too, not just immigrants. But what that means is then ICE is not directly operating the facility, and so that typical oversight that is required under 2 federal laws doesn't happen. And so the legislature has heard now for 3 years, we're going into our 4th year, a bill that would stop that, no longer allow that contractual form of agreement. It's called an Intergovernmental Service Agreement ban. The law is called the Immigrant Safety Act. It did get through the House in the last session, and then Senator Joseph Cervantes, who's the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, did not give it a hearing before Senate Judiciary, so it did not get to the Senate floor. He, another person, very much like my great uncles and grandfather, you know, we can't shame him into agreement, but we can help him hear other angles of why it might be beneficial to him. And what we're hearing from him lately is that he actually feels the target on his back of the administration. He has said in 2 public settings, and I was testifying before the CCJ interim committee in August, and he said that ICE was akin to the KKK in public. And then a couple of weeks ago at a follow-up interim committee meeting, he said that he felt like he had a target on his back because he's Hispanic, because he's brown, because he speaks Spanish. The Supreme Court has now said that he can be racially profiled. And he called himself a farmer. His family owns chili fields, and he's a lawyer, but he was like, and I'm a farmer. So he's feeling like his identity is wrapped up in the identity of folks who he previously didn't see himself in, and I think there's a lot of power in that. So we'll see what happens. He's had the Attorney General present about the legality of the Immigrant Safety Act. We've presented about the legality of it. He really is using the interim, it seems like, to garner Democratic support, potentially, to at least get the bill to the floor. We know we're going to get through the House again, so we need to get to the Senate floor, and I think we have the votes, especially if the Lieutenant Governor will be our tiebreaker, we think, the way it's going. So watch during the 30-day, the governor has said she's going to put it on her call. If that bill is successful, what that means is that overnight, ICE would either have to release the folks that they're detaining or move them to some other detention facility. They would have either 30 or 60 days to exercise the right to terminate the contract, and those individuals would immediately need to be either released or transported. ICE can then turn right around and contract to operate its own facility out of either those facilities or its own. But what we're talking about here is, I don't know if folks followed, like I keep thinking about that free speech activist from the 60s, Mario forgetting his last name, Savia, and he said there comes a time when you have to throw your body on the like the gears of the machine, because what does that do? It slows the machine down. And so the Immigrant Safety Act would slow the machine down while they figured out how to open up another facility. But then that facility would have or require congressional oversight, and maybe the midterms go our way, and maybe the oversight happens. So there's all these little chess pieces that we're trying to move around at the same time that I feel like we're also in the trenches. So that's the first question. The second question around the rocket docket, yeah, I think they're just going to punt as much as they can. For example, the birthright citizenship case that Trump issued an executive order saying that children will no longer have birthright citizenship, and those children's children will not. So, I know a man who's Korean who's been was a family law doctor here for 50 years. He has 3 children. Those children all went to law school and are all lawyers. He nor his children nor his grandchildren would have citizenship. So the way that the Supreme Court punted that case was to say that this nationwide injunction trend that we've been seeing over the years is no longer something they can no longer support. So they didn't say, no, Trump can get away with his end of birthright citizenship. They said, you can't do nationwide injunctions anymore. You have to come through as a class. So the very next day, class action was filed on the issue, and now that's being litigated. But it will go, so they can't punt this. When it gets back to them, the Supreme Court will have to decide on whether or not birthright citizenship, which is enshrined in the 14th Amendment, to go back to what Reverend Mike was saying about the end of slavery, and then Supreme Court interpreted that 14th Amendment provision in another case involving a Chinese American man who was sought to be not a citizen when he returned from just visiting family in China in 1898. The Supreme Court said, no, he was born here. The 14th Amendment, as interpreted, means he is a citizen, and all people born here are. They would overturn that precedent in order to find for Trump's birthright citizenship. So those are the kinds of things that are happening at the Supreme Court level, and then just still on the ground, we have to be doing everything we can to protect every immigrant that's a New Mexican.
I'm going to take us over to Poppy.
It seems to be creating interesting bedfellows here. Is there any kinship among organized labor?
Is there any kinship with organized labor?
I'm seeing really amazing organizing right now in New Mexico. There's a great group called Organizing Power in Numbers. They're bringing labor organizing tactics to movement building. Their executive director, Neddy Dominguez, was one of the folks who is the reason why we have DACA. She's such a force. She's incredible. I highly recommend asking her to come speak to you all. It's a real treat to be in her presence. But she's also a very, very effective organizer. And I'm seeing her organize with the teachers, AFT, and then also the healthcare workers with SEIU. They're really doing a lot right now, both with their members and showing up to protect folks. There's a Albuquerque Immigrant Rights Committee that meets every week, and many union folks are at that meeting as well. It's a pretty exciting time right now for unions.
We go to Diane.
My question is just about you said there are citizens who are being detained. Do they have any priority in their cases at all?
So do citizens who are detained have any priority in their cases?
No, that's the scary thing right now. There is no prioritization. There is no triaging of who's in there. Unless you have an attorney who can file a habeas petition for you, you are stuck in there until they finally get around to your case. It's horrific. And then because there's so much money, there is so much money flowing around right now. The big bill had $150 billion in it for immigration detention and deportation. And so the way that they're moving immigrants around the country are through private plane companies. And the profiteering that's happening is just, it's abhorrent. So this one plane company has moved individuals to 4 different detention centers around the country because they get paid every time they fly someone around the country. And so what they're trying to figure out is how long can they keep a body in a detention center because they get paid for every day the person's in there? How often can they move them? How far away from their family and community can they move them from? And then whether they actually get to speak with an ICE official about their case seems to be the bottom priority, unless you have an attorney. So the reason we are loving these volunteer projects so much is because the more people we can send in and hear, like if someone's like, I have TPS, then that elevates it up to an attorney, and we can make sure that the attorney who is filing habeas petitions knows there's someone with TPS inside the facility. But if there's no one to talk to that person, they just languish.
So say a word about, you said you're right about it, the place to stand up something, but is there something somebody can sign up for now with New Mexico Immigrant Law Center?
Yes, you have to go to our website, and you have to sign an interest form. We have an incredible volunteer coordinator. Her name is Delaney Swink. She's right now coordinating somewhere around 200 volunteers. We want another 200. We're hiring for her to have an associate so that she can make sure that people we do really thoughtful onboarding with volunteers. We want people to talk about what they can commit to, whatever that is, but commit to it. We want folks to think through the ethics of what it is they're going to be asked to do. We want people to be ethical in the way that they behave around a very vulnerable population, like I'm sure all of you will be, but you can imagine some of the folks who apply to be volunteers through our website. And so Delaney does an individual meeting with each person who indicates that they want to volunteer. We're talking with Simone right now about potentially like Simone being like the go-between, and maybe could bring like 10 folks so that there wouldn't have to be the one-on-one interview with Delaney. But really the way to do it would go to the website, sign up your interest to be a volunteer. You would meet with Delaney, and then she would tell you the 7 things that we have as volunteer opportunities, and then folks could do that. And the one that would help you get into the detention center would be visiting a detention center. So what's the website? It's nmilc.org, or just Google New Mexico Immigrant Law Center.
And we will put that in TCS this week. So we will have that out. I have got to run to the next service, but Teague, I have to say, we were together the first year I was here. We were together in the Senate Judiciary hearing when Joseph Cervantes did vote for what is now called the Immigrant Safety Act. And I have to say, it is such a blessing to work with somebody who's got such a deep grounding and an ethic, but also a deep faith in what is possible, and to watch the way that you're mentoring a whole group of people that are doing this work. And so just thank you so much, both for your presentation today, but for all that you're doing. Will you join me in thanking Teague?
Thank you. Can I say one thing? Yeah. So another thing the federal government did is they're required under Congressional Act to provide legal services to young people. It's through the Trafficking and Victim Protection Act, and Congress has always appropriated funds for that. And they did last year too, but in this fall, we know that they're going to gut those funds for services for young people. So our organization is the only organization that receives those funds in New Mexico. It's about $1.5 million. So we have a $1.5 million fundraising campaign. If you are so moved, you will see a button there to donate to our Rapid Response Fund. And that is to try and get us there. We're at $890,000. So if we could get there before the end of the year, that would be awesome. But that's what you'll see. You'll see a button there for that.
So yeah, reach out to donate, reach out to volunteer. And again, thank you all so much. Thank you, Teague.
Thank you.